job, guys. I love you. We'll be after this. And I can't speak today. Sing along.
Hey, did you see me? Did you see me?
See you where?
And you didn't see me?
No.
How can you not see me?
Where were you?
I was in the closet.
Why were you in the closet?
I was...
Why are you out of the closet?
I saw
What is that? What is that song?
What's what?
That song?
It's a song.
Why are you singing that song?
It's new.
Oh really, huh? Then how come I've never heard of it?
Kids are trying to write a CD.
Nothing says nostalgia like the mid-2000s. Well, at least on this channel. We've exploited it quite a bit, and the reason we do so is because, honestly, it was the Wild West. For culture, for music, for media, things were all over the place. Almost anything could go. You could create a horrific horror show for little kids, or, Adventure Time, which would end up inspiring things that would create ramifications we're still dealing with today. I swear to God, the show ruined an entire generation of kids. But as I said, back in 2007, the internet was still the Wild West, and alternative culture was still going through its emo phase. With Molgoths running around with fringe covering their faces everywhere, and post-hardcore music blaring on the radio. But 2008 would come around and it would be a very formative and important year. It was the transitional period between the Molgoth emo wave that had been booming since 2002 and the introduction to what would become the neon-soaked, raw-laden scene that would come to really reign for years and define the whole emo aesthetic going forward. And while there were many big projects of this era, and an entire music scene that would do quite a bit of heavy lifting, there was a handful of particular projects that were more integral than others, and quite possibly one of the most integral of all of them is one that to this day still doesn't get the flowers that they deserve. And that would be none other than the band I Set My Friends on Fire. I Set My Friends on Fire is one of the most important bands to ever walk the scene, being responsible for kickstarting this screamo pop rap trend that we can still hear today, as well as being the band that penned one of the most integral scene albums of all time. They were a big deal during their heyday, but sadly their story is a little bit tragic. Thanks to some sabotaging by their record label, a long period of uncertainty and alienation, and tragically just the fact that their desire to avoid trends and be true to themselves kept them separate from just about everything else that was going on at the time. ISMFOF is a bit of a forgotten titan, one who really only lives on in nostalgia for those who were around for that time and mentioned in passing when the topic of scene music comes up. And you know what? That shit ain't gonna cut it, because these guys are not only forerunners, but trendsetters. And not only trendsetters, they're just fucking good. I Set My Friends on Fire is one of the best that the whole Molgoth emo scene, whatever the fuck you want to call it, wave produced. And they do deserve those flowers. So you know what? Let's rewind back to the uncivilized era of the late 2000s. Let's embrace our inner scene kid. And let's talk about I Set My Friends on Fire.
So, what do you do for a living?
I sing in this band.
Oh, so you're a singer.
Yeah, I sing a bit here. Yeah.
Why don't you sing something for me?
Oh no, I'm too shy. I can't.
Come on, it'd be cool. I want to hear you.
Okay, alright.
Like most scene bands, or really bands in general, I Set My Friends on Fire was birthed through death. The duo was originally part of a different project called We Are the Cavalry, or later, the Cavalry Kids, a short-lived band from Miami, Florida, who more or less went through the exact same sort of story as every other high school scene band. A bunch of guys got together, they form a band, make some pretty terrible demos while trying to find their voice, and break up before ever really going anywhere. Outside of a scant few low-quality uploads on YouTube, not much is really archived of We Are the Cavalry, but thankfully both Matt and Nabil have talked about the band in interviews.
We Are the Cavalry was I think we formed it when I was either a junior or senior in high school, and it was Matt, myself, and then three other two of my schoolmates, and then a friend that I had. Then we just kind of did it for a couple of years, and or maybe a year and a half or so. But then I don't know, pretty much I think senior year everyone was like going to move off, and Matt and I were like, okay, well, we still want to make music together. So then that's how we kind of started just dabbling together, and created I Set My Friends on Fire.
I met Nabil at a first band practice trial, whatever you want to call it. But it was the first time I met him and first time we practiced, first time we did anything with each other. And it was like it was in our drummer's backyard in like this little barn looking shed and whatever. So JD, the one who invited me to do like dual screaming with him, came. We both screamed we were both screaming at the same time, and I hadn't really had that much experience screaming up until that point. But I guess since I was so like happy to like get this like little opportunity, because it was fun, you know. I was like out screaming him, and people were noticing. Like they noticed in the garage, like, oh shit. But whatever, like I wasn't gonna kick him out if he invited me in, you know what I mean? So we just kept the whole screaming, like dual screamer thing going for a while. For about like half a year, and then he went to college.
Okay.
And I was like, fuck it, I'll stay. I'm the better screamer here anyway. I might as well just stay. So I was in We Are the Cavalry for a year with Nabil.
Did you guys do any touring?
No. This is
so all local shit.
Straight local, but every time we did a local show, it was really good.
Nice.
Like they had respect for it. So.
No, I've seen some videos. People were going fucking nuts.
Yeah, dude, those were the days, man, for real. And but after a year of We Are the Cavalry, everybody else that was in the band wanted to go to they needed to go to college. So, but Nabil and I were still in high school. They were like, why don't you and I just let's keep doing music with each other, but just name it something else.
As We Are the Cavalry more or less broke up, Matt and Nabil would keep working together, and they would form a new project where they both agreed to say fuck it to creative restrictions and just do what they wanted. And this is where the real start to the story would begin. The duo would brand themselves as I Set My Friends on Fire, a name that was both catchy and one famous for being a song by the forgotten post-hardcore project Aiden. And everyone, myself included, assumed that this was where the name originated. But to everyone's surprise, this was just a rumor. Well, at least according to Wikipedia. Neither member was aware of Aiden as a band, and Matt in particular thought that they sucked. But from here, once the band started getting their shit together and really forming into what they wanted to be, they would start to split up their responsibilities, with Matt obviously being the frontman, vocalist, and lyricist of the group, and Nabil taking on the role of songwriter and multi-instrumentalist, playing guitar, bass, and backing vocals, and programming synths and drums. While this time period is where the initial versions of tracks that would define the band's sound would come to be, and they would work on their initial demo, the most integral part of the story from this era was that it was around this time, mind you, the band was unknown and the duo was still seniors in high school, would craft their most famous piece to date. And that would be the Crank That cover.
Soldier boy, I'm in this hole. Watch me crank it, watch me roll. Watch me crank it, soldier boy, let's do for me. Let him know, watch me. Right inside your heart. Right inside your heart.
Yeah, back in 2007, during the height of LimeWire's reign on the internet, a brilliant young mind would craft a song that would define an entire generation. And not just any generation, but the swag generation. And his name was DeAndre Way, aka Soulja Boy. Long before Soulja Boy would be defined by bootlegging and selling video games, and his appearances in some of the best of Much Dank's meme videos. In the late 2000s, Crank That and Soulja Boy in general was damn near inescapable. The song had spread through LimeWire and garnered a shit ton of popularity, and the polarizing nature of Soulja Boy's persona only propelled him to get even bigger, especially since he produced a rap dance track, and this was the era of rap dances. Crank That, The Dougie, Wheelchair Stuntin', there was just an endless amount of these, but Crank That in particular was one of the biggest of its time, and upon hearing it and seeing just how ripe for potential it was for a Screamo cover, Matt would throw out the idea to Nabil.
And I was like, dude, we have to do this. This is gonna blow up. And he's like, no, this is a stupid idea. I was like, really? You really think this is a bad idea? He's like, yeah. The week went by, kept trying to convince him. He was still not about it. Finally, like after 3 weeks, he was like, fine, let's do it. Let's just do it. I'm like, okay, watch. I was like, Nabil, watch. How crazy this is gonna be. Recorded the song. The song actually sounded fire to us.
Yeah.
So I'm still in high school at this point. I upload the song at night on our MySpace, and this is times where it's like not easy to get on the internet, in like 2008, and I was in school too, so it's not like I really couldn't get on the internet, and my phone didn't have no internet.
Probably like took like 10 hours to upload a song.
Exactly. So whatever, I uploaded it before I went to school, came back home, and you know that expression like blew up overnight.
Yep.
Okay, so mind you, I uploaded this before school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, came back home. I didn't go on MySpace because I didn't think anything of it, and it was still kind of a new platform, so I didn't really care. I took a nap. I woke up around like 5 p.m. and then I finally checked MySpace. I had 10,000 friend requests.
And to the surprise of Nabil and expectation of Matt, the Crank That cover would go viral. So much so that MySpace straight up thought that they were botting plays and removed their page multiple times. The success of the band essentially came overnight, with the cover bringing them mass amounts of attention, and all this before the band even played a single show. But to say this was the only thing that they were doing that helped spark their career would just be selling them short. As the Crank That cover was going viral, the dynamic duo would also begin working on supplementary content, in this case, YouTube videos. And yeah, these were very of the time.
Why don't you grow up here, be a man and scream? What's so hard about that?
Okay.
Okay. Stop your crying. I'll give you one more shot, alright? Alright, here you go. Yeah! Yeah! Yeah, that's it! Kill that thing!
What the hell? What the hell is that? Where'd it go?
But as easy as it is to really scoff at these were the cream of the crop of YouTube at the time. You gotta remember, the late 2000s YouTube landscape was ruled by the likes of Fred, Keyboard Cat, and especially Smosh, another duo whose videos were similar and far more popular, and will pop up again later in the story. But the reason I bring it up is because these videos would prove to be another avenue in aiding ISMFOF to their early success. And it was the culmination of all these different elements that really primed ISMFOF to take over. The relatability of their YouTube content, the viral Crank That cover that made them a household name to the scene pretty much overnight, and the fact that underneath all of this was two talented musicians with some great songs and some creative and interesting innovations to the genre that hadn't been seen before. It was a perfect storm, really. And after putting out their self-titled EP composed of early versions of many of the tracks that would be fully realized on their debut, it would end up granting the boys a call from Epitaph Records, one of the biggest of the alt scene records at the time. And with that, history was about to be made.
So clean, oh my god. Damn it. Ah, okay, there you go. Oh, hi there. Didn't see you come in. Thank you. Many have been coming up to us in the street saying, ISMFOF, why aren't you coming out with new tracks? And that's a very good question. Matt? What did you say? We just got signed to Epitaph Records!
Once the duo got picked up by Epitaph Records, they would hit the ground running, with the band getting Travis Richter from First to Last to produce the record and later record with Lee Dyes, someone else famous for his work with From First to Last. Travis would help the band write a little bit, but would ultimately serve more so as an ideas guy and a cheerleader. And for anyone familiar with him, you would understand why Travis was probably one of the best guys to choose to produce on a project like ISMFOF. Well, you can definitely hear some of that From First to Last DNA on I Set My Friends on Fire. If you listen to one of the deeper cuts from this era, the criminally underrated Color of Violence project, it's really easy to see why Travis was the right man for the job. And once pre-production was finished, the duo would head off to Georgia to record with Lee Dyes. Lee was the man who produced the record Dear Diary, Why Teen Angst Has a Body Count, as well as later on Thrown to the Wolves. Again, a part of the FFTL family. And that's not to say that ISMFOF was some branch off that tree, but more so they were in good hands in terms of who was working with them. A tried and true crew, if you will. After the record was finished and the production was set, the band would shoot some music videos for promo, as well as develop their now iconic mascot, the Norwal. Yeah, I know. Old internet memes are cringe, yada yada. This was before Reddit ruined the whole Norwal thing. So just hold your breath, you fucking nerd. Matt would give the idea for a Norwal being the art, along with the name of the record, to Epitaph. and what was returned to them was now the iconic artwork of the Norwal covered in purple intestines. And it was just perfect. It was cute, but morbid, attached to a band with a name that was tongue-in-cheek, but still morbid, and an album whose name was also tongue-in-cheek and really fucking funny, as well as morbid. And over it all, came together just to be timeless, an artifact of its era, perfectly enclosed as something that you can look at and instantly know what year it came out. Something to keep in mind is that 2008 was the year that a lot of what was the original emo scene, that had that more dark and depressing visage behind it, was really starting to morph into the neon-laden scene kid aesthetic that we know today. And I Set My Friends on Fire was a massive big part of that happening. Amidst the emo fringe, black t-shirt box cutter brigade of the time, emerged this duo of dorky looking goofballs from Miami, wearing polo shirts with bright colors and album art that screamed from the get-go that this wasn't just about to be some whiny record about a guy breaking up with his high school sweetheart. Rather, it let you know that you were about to hear something entirely different. And on that note, why don't we just talk about the record? The album opens up with this ridiculous skit track, setting the stage for what's to come with both members being introduced as they conversate after a show, complete with self-deprecating humor and an introduction of an alien character, whisking away the duo to play a show on his home planet.
Would you like to play a show on our home planet?
Do they talk shit there?
No.
Alright,
let's go.
Yeah, baby, let's go!
From here, we get the first actual track off the record. And right from the word go, you were greeted with a sound that would define an entire generation of scene kids. And it's easy to see why. Beyond some of the gimmicky aspects of the sound and its more memey nature at times, at its core was fantastic vocals, clever lyrics, and a fresh and interesting take on songwriting, all with a lot of heart behind it. It might sound silly to treat this record with as much respect as I'm giving it, but that's really just how good it is. While some will see it as just an emo relic, the love and passion that was put into You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter is just something that you can't ignore. Track after track is filled to the brim with something unreplicatable due to just how palpable the heart to it was. From the contemporary post-hardcore bangers like Things That Rhyme with Orange, the experimental and captivating songs like ASL, to sassy and sarcastic anthems like But the Nuns Are Watching. You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter is just mandatory listening to anyone who wants to get into post-hardcore. And it stands the test of time because it not only encapsulates the period it's from, but perfected many of the sounds and brought countless amounts of innovation for the time. This is why I didn't include ISMFOF in my crunkcore video, to the dismay of a few of you. Because while yes, they did do the Soulja Boy cover and Hardcore Two-Step were viral for their time and both great songs, especially Hardcore Two-Step. And yeah, they brought a lot of people into the fold. To really define the band as a progenitor of crunkcore and pigeonhole them there is, it's just insulting and downplaying what they actually were. Entire bands have gone on to be derivatives of I Set My Friends on Fire, and especially the sound on this very record. And that's for a reason. Obviously, I'm not the only one who feels like this, because at the time, the album was huge, and the band would go on to support the record via Warped Tour, as well as play a few successful tours of their own. And they would continue just to grow and grow and grow, becoming one of the biggest trendsetters of their time. In many ways, ISMFOF was spiritually similar to another artist in the scene who also broke out in 2008. Attack Attack and I Set My Friends on Fire were both bands who debuted in 2008 to some strong success, both for their weird fusion of electronica and post-hardcore. Though this early crossover was not something that would last beyond a few comparisons. Where Attack Attack birthed crabcore and many of the bands fusing electronics with metalcore would follow in line, cementing the whole crabcore wave, the one that we remember today with bands like Asking Alexandria, Icy Stars, and Abandon All Ships, and countless others, I Set My Friends on Fire, on the other hand, would go the opposite direction. They would play more into the past in a lot of ways. Their sound did have some metalcore elements to it, but more or less stayed in the classic post-hardcore sound that was a staple of the early to mid-2000s. Just taking that sound and really elevating it and pushing it forward, rather than trying to completely reinvent the wheel or water down what was metalcore during that time, which, no offense, Attack Attack and a lot of the crapcore wave really did, by just simplifying that genre down. And to be redundant but really get my point across, I Set My Friends on Fire did the opposite. They took the past and they pushed it far forward. And this would end up working as a bit of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, they would really alienate themselves in the whole scene by being much more of a one-of-a-kind act among their contemporaries, not really being able to truly fit in with everyone else. But on the other hand, it was due to this that it would also help them gain a much more cult and devout following, unique among the crowd of everyone else. And following forward, this would be what would keep them in the public eye, as well as keep the band relevant following forward. But as with anything, when it comes time to do the second record, when it's your sophomore year as a full-on band, things can either go very smoothly, or they can go incredibly rough. So now, we gotta talk about Astral Rejection.
Well, the new record just came out today, Chicken Bread, so I'm just trying.
Wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? No, stop. No, stop. No, that's a new album. That's a new album. It's not how you make a new album. That's how you make a new album.
The success of You Can't Spell Slaughter Without Laughter really can't be understated. It's not only what propelled the band to new heights of popularity and acclaim, but opened the doors for a new generation of bands and artists to really take the whole emo scene thing into a new direction. And I know I've said that more times than I probably need to by now, so hey, forgive me, but it is something very important to bring up. The band would spend the next 2 years after its release touring in support of the record, and during this time period, they would adopt Chris Lent, a former member of From First to Last, as well as a touring drummer for The Color of Violence. He would initially just be a hired gun for tours and eventually become a full-time member, bringing the duo to a trio. It was also around this time that they would begin to work with other artists and do collaborations, most predominantly and popularly with Smosh. As I said before, Smosh during this era was very similar in spirit in many ways, holding that same sense of late 2000s early YouTube humor built out of skits and just cheesy antics, as well as just feeling like two best friends coming together to make something that they laugh at themselves. And these collaborations would prove to be very successful for both parties involved, exposing I Set My Friends on Fire to an entirely new audience, as well as Smosh to another audience, and even legitimizing them in a way, because the thing about early YouTube was that no matter who you were looked at as a poser or as cringe outside of your fan base. And while, yeah, that's callous, that was just internet culture of the time. The first of these two collabs would be the infamous Sex Ed Rocks. A juvenilely hilarious track with a silly video, and again, yes, I know, all you edgelords who were above it will just be like, oh, this is so lame. It was hilarious at the time, and honestly, this, and especially the second track they worked on together, still stand tall and hold up all these years later. And speaking of that second one, that would be the underrated and sadly forgotten gem, 4 Years Foreplay. Just let it stand that Matt has always written really relatable lyrics, and the line about douchebag kids kicking over your roller backpack even though it was convenient, yeah, that was true. Those textbooks were fucking heavy. Both these collaborations were not just fun filler for the time, but actually pretty lucrative in terms of creating more popularity for the band. Smosh was, as I said before, one of the biggest channels on YouTube at this time, and this was also right during their golden age, if you want to call it that. And it was just another avenue for the band to gain a lot more fans and more recognition, allowing their star to rise even higher. But alas, this is where we enter the territory of shifting changes and complications. It was around this time in late 2009, early 2010, where they would begin to work on their sophomore record. And this is where all that smooth sailing turns to a crash. Initially, the band would take up the same process as before, with Nabil taking on all musical duties and locking himself away for weeks at a time before re-emerging with a new song to present to Matt, who was still handling all frontman, lyrical, and obviously vocal duties. And this would start to result in quite a bit of strain, as Nabil had been moving into more directions musically and writing much more mature and less gimmick-based music, while Matt, being relatively kept out of the songwriting duties, would have to repeatedly tell him that no, the songs he was producing were not going to cut it, leading to tensions to rise between the two. But this is just normal band stuff. Where shit really hits the fan was when the band had a mostly completed record ready to present Epitaph before heading into full-on production and official recording. And this is when the bad news would actually hit. Something behind the scenes would happen, and it would lead to Nabil calling it quits and the record being shelved. But information on just what was actually going on was pretty limited and obfuscated. Matt would originally not say anything about Nabil's departure until finally being interviewed about it a little while later, and it's a bit of an awkward interview where he tries to make sure he says that they're still friends, which, to be fair, they were, but that there wasn't a whole lot of big tensions, and it was just because Nabil wanted to go to college.
Nabil has left the band. There hasn't been any word from either of you guys. What's the story on that one?
Well, I figured I'd just tell people in person. I don't know, I feel like personal stuff is better like in person, you know? So, I don't know. Usually when you say stuff on online, people make up their own stories and all these other rumors like start spreading shit. I don't know.
And as much as this was a, I guess, decent enough explanation for the time, it was also in this interview where Matt would inadvertently hint at things going on regarding the recording process and something deeper being at play.
So there's rumor on Wikipedia, or may not be a rumor, that says you're going to shelf the entire album that you've already recorded and go back in and re-record everything without Nabil. Is that true, or?
Well, we're not shelving it. We're just it was more like a pre-production kind of thing. You know, Nabil and I wrote a few songs. I'm gonna keep like maybe 2 or 3, but the rest of it is gonna be completely from scratch.
So will he be on the tracks or no?
Maybe for 3 songs, but that's it.
Okay, you guys have a title for the album yet?
Well, it was supposed to be called Astral Rejection, but I'm not sure if it's gonna remain that way.
Did you have a set release date, a new set release date for the album?
No set release date.
But at the time, most people just kind of glossed over this info. But looking back at it today, it's easy to see that something more was definitely going on. I mean, you don't just scrap an entire record and delay it almost a full year if all that happened was your bandmate leaving and going to college. But regardless, at this point, that's all we really knew. And for the next year that the album would be delayed, fans would just have to wait. And this year would end up being a crucial time period for the scene, as new trends and other artists began to both eclipse ISMFOF in popularity and shift the sounds away from the tides that they were before. Like I mentioned before, 2008 was when a lot of this big transition started, but by 2010 is when a lot of the bands that were popping up at the time were having their sophomore records, and the new bands popping up that they inspired were all pushing things way further away from where it all started. This was when crapcore was in full swing. You started to have gent in its early stages kind of pop up here and there, and a lot more of the more post-hardcore sound that still survived was going much more in a pop direction, and not a playful pop-y direction like ISMFOF, but just straight up punkos pop was really beginning to overtake everything in that scene. And this is where the cracks begin to show. Back in 2010, when the album was originally going to come out, the original version of Excite Dyke was released. And while it was relatively in line with the band's previous material, it maintained a far less gimmick-based sound, containing little to no auto-tune and really no meme-y sounding synths of its era. It was a song received decently well, but like I said, this whole album was scrapped and reworked, so let's look at the official album version for a comparison. Yeah, remember what I said about ISMFOF being much more in line with classic post-hardcore originally? Well, throw that out the fucking window, because one of the biggest reasons Astral Rejection was divisive was because it jumps straight into the pits of 2010 metalcore, focusing on chuggy low-tuned breakdowns, more technical guitar playing, as well as abrasive and heavy songs throughout. It Comes Naturally can really be seen as a litmus test for the album. If you like the song, you'll probably be down with the record. If you think it's too abrasive and misses the point of what made the band what it was, you're gonna hate this thing. Now, for me, even though Astral Rejection has a pretty love it or hate it reputation, I've always been stuck somewhere in the middle. Admittedly, this is more due to nostalgia because, like I said, back when I was a kid, I was obsessed with this band, and even though I was definitely let down by this record, I still did love it. But as an adult, the sentiment hasn't really changed much, but for different reasons. The main difference now is I can see where things actually work really well and where the record really shines, and where the ideas to try and make it all purposely weird and appease the label actually kind of fumbles the bag for the band. For example, the album isn't just heavier, Even the use of electronics on this thing is far more abrasive and even more cheesy than the very of the time FL Studio presets that came before. But that doesn't mean the spirit is totally lost. The song Developer the Horn is still a favorite of mine and contains a lot of the signature charm that the band is known for. But that's kind of the thing. Astral Rejection as a whole is like this. The album on its own isn't really bad by any means, it's more so that it loses its identity quite a bit, with tracks that feel like they're trying too hard to up the gimmicks, or like they came from a side project. But at the same time, there are still quite a few songs that hold that original charm and identity of what came before. And if you do give this record a second chance, you'll probably find it more enjoyable than you did back in the day. But alas, this is a perspective all the way now in 2024. The sad reality was that in 2011, when this record hit shelves, it was a divisive piece that would begin a long cycle of alienation, with many fans jumping off and the band more or less dealing with a consistent stream of diminished returns, with tours, album sales, popularity, etc. And come the end of 2011, it would culminate in Chris Lent leaving the project. And from here, a very dark period for the band would begin. Alright, as is probably obvious, Astral Rejection would end up being a big strain on the project, and really the dissolvement of the band as it was, with 2 of its 3 members going their own way, and an overall mixed reception and loss of popularity with its once rabid fan base. It would all kind of just culminate in a miserable stew of stress and emotions for Matt. He would ultimately keep touring on and off through 2012 and 2013, and during this time he would begin to work on what would be the elusive third record, Caterpillar Sex. Stupid title, I know. But the title is the least of what makes Caterpillar Sex an enigma. I mean, even to this day, it's stated to be still in production, but like most Vapor albums, I'm not holding my breath over it. If it comes out, it comes out. But until I have that CD in my hands, to me it will always be a myth. And I know that sounds harsh, but I say that because from roughly 2012 up until now, it's been in production on and off. But it's something Matt would tease and talk about a lot, specifically during 2013 through 2016, with him consistently uploading these odd lo-fi demos onto his YouTube channel. As you probably can hear, it sounded nothing like any of the band's previous material. And even among the slew of the demos, they would consistently shift between uploads to what they sounded like and how they really worked. They each just felt like a musician struggling to find a voice amidst a loss of identity, and sadly that was more than likely what was actually happening. You have to keep in mind that by this point, I Set My Friends on Fire was no longer a full-on band. It was just Matt carrying the torch forward by himself, working on demos alone. Original songwriter Nabil was long gone by this point, and even Chris Lent was also long gone. It was just Matt trying to learn production and learn how to write music from the ground up on his own, using whatever means he could. Now bring into the mix that he's already dealing with God knows how much stress after everything that happened with Epitaph and the ultimate dissolvement of his band, as well as the stress and frustration that comes with having to learn to write, record, mix, and master, and even then, trying to do so while maintaining a very eclectic sound. And, well, you have these demos. And what would come of this was, well, you heard them. Now, I don't want to say anything else negative here because at the time the responses to this material was just mixed at best and absolutely fucking harsh at worst. And I'm not gonna lie, I was part of this same backlash myself, but being the little shit I was, I had no idea just what was actually going on, how hard it actually is to write and record music, and what kind of stress and frustration Matt was dealing with. But that was everyone else as well. We all lacked context to understand just why things were turning out this way. So coming back to it all these years later and giving them a more fair listen, these demos, I can honestly say, at least for most of them, while they are bizarre and definitely not for everyone, there's some cool ideas here. And a lot of interesting blending of sounds and really a haunting quality to many of these demos. It's just hidden underneath some pretty amateurish production for its time and a set of musical expectations that came with the name ISMFOF. But something else that was unknown to the public during this time period was what really played into probably more so what was going on than anything else. And that was Matt's battle with hearing loss and periodic deafness.
I was going through kind of like a depression because one day, as I was getting really good at making beats, you know, la la la, in my kitchen, fucking making beats and shit, my ear like all of a sudden, like I felt this suction feeling in my ear. It was like, and then like my ear felt like I was in a plane and I couldn't hear it. I was like, oh fuck, what is this?
Oh no.
And I went to the doctor and they're like, oh, you just have an ear infection, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, whatever. Next day it didn't go away. Next day it didn't go away. It just like never went away. And like I went to ear, nose, and throat doctors, tried to give me steroids. It was terrible. It never went away. So basically, when you lose hearing, that's what it feels like. It feels like you're in a plane and you can't hear through one of it's basically like a clogged feeling. That's what deafness feels like. So
sucks.
I've been dealing with that since the start of me announcing Caterpillar Sex, and nobody knew that.
What was that, like 2012 or
2013?
Okay.
I announced it. I put out a single, and then after that single, that shit happened, and then I was like, I went into a really bad depression because of that. You know, because like, you know, obviously hearing and music go hand in hand. So I was like, dude, fuck, how am I gonna do this without feeling uncomfortable every time I go to make music?
The dude was really going through it, deep into a depression caused by both the implosion of his band, the negative reception he was receiving, and the horrifying experience of trying to work through hearing loss and just straight up deafness. I mean, I can think of nothing scarier for a musician than losing your ability to hear and enjoy music, let alone create it. So it all really just explains a lot more of the reclusive nature of Matt during this time and why things were just so off from an outside perspective. But thankfully, this isn't where our story ends, and after one last track that would cause a bit more negative attention, which would be a cover of the track My Way by Fetty Wap, around the same time, Matt would begin to work with Nate Blasdell, a bit of an unspoken hero in the scene who, at the time, had just left the Bunny the Bear, and he and Matt would begin sparking some new life into ISMFOF, and a rebirth of sorts would begin.
ISMFOF 2015, motherfucker. What's good?
late 2015 would see a rebirth of the band, with a whole slew of new members joining, and them all hitting the road and playing shows again for the first time in a long time. And these shows we met with mostly positivity. And before you say it, yeah, there was a lot of nostalgia baiting here, but unlike other bands that nostalgia bait to just kind of scam whatever little bit of cash they can get out of their fans, with ISMFOF it was genuinely like a real return to form. And there was a lot more promise to what was going on here as new material was being produced. And one of the first tracks we got of this new material would be the song My Uzi Holds a 100-Round Conscience. This song felt like returning home after a long trip. And essentially that's what it was. After becoming as eclectic and out there as possible with Astral Rejection and going even further out into the ether with the Caterpillar demos, this song was really just a return to form, going back to the roots of what the band was known for and what made them famous. And along with this, in early 2017, they would announce that they had been signed to Tragic Hero Records and again embark on some more tours in support of their new releases and really just getting their name back into the ether. But where things really start to get juicy during this period is actually with a set of leaks that happened. In 2017, a few people began to quietly leak out and put out and just drop a lot of the tracks from the original version of Astral Rejection. The one that Epitaph shelved, that caused the original ripples that would turn to the massive tsunami that would lead to many of the initial struggles the band had to deal with over the years. And while this would have been a call for celebration for just about anyone else, with, shitty fucking labels, they like to point fingers, and in this case, they began pointing them at Matt, and this was a little dubious. Now, we don't know what Matt's contract entailed, but more than likely, it prevented him from being the one to actually put this stuff out there. And it just wasn't good news to see the label essentially start playing bull with Matt over his own work getting out there. Because, I mean, how dare we as fans get to hear the original work of a band that we really enjoyed? How dare anybody get to enjoy music that was made? Because no. Epitaph did us a favor by shelving the record and fucking ISMFOF over so hard that it caused ramifications for years. You just don't understand. But regardless, this would put some big pressure onto the label, and since the cat was essentially out of the bag by this point, conversations would start to happen. And things would only really ramp up in pressure given a year later when Matt would be on the 10-year anniversary for Slaughter and would finally go in depth in various interviews, but most famously with Dead Press, revealing everything about the original version of Astral Rejection. Basically, the label heard it and said, this isn't like the first album at all, it's more mature. They wanted more hip-hop. Ironically, back in that time, they wanted more hip-hop shit. But I wasn't writing the music at the time. But I knew what they wanted. I said, I know what you want, but I can't write yet. Nabil wrote all of the music. He would go into his room for like 2 weeks and write, and more power to him. Because I know how it is to write now, and I can't write with anybody around me. So you know what he felt at that time. At the time, I was confused, and I was like, why the hell would he go into a room by himself and write and not let me be part of the music? But then I realized, sometimes when I explain things, it's really out there. I don't know why. I just explain things really bizarrely. So imagine somebody like me trying to explain a part to somebody who plays guitar, and I know nothing about music theory or anything like that. It probably gets really annoying after a while. I don't know. It was weird because on the first album, I would hum him some riffs and stuff like that, and he would play them and boom, we'd have written a song. I don't know why he wanted to change his approach to writing on the second one. I think it was just stress and pressure, to be honest with you, because we were deeper in the game, and once you release a first album, there's more pressure for the second one to be even better. So he wrote and wrote, and then he would come back into the studio and show me a song, and my selfish ass would hear the song and be like, I don't like it. I was just being honest, but we were also running out of time. So we'd get really frustrated and go back and write, then come back with something else. I didn't want to tell him that stuff sucked again, but there were moments where the music was really good and I did what I had to do over the music with my vocals. I just did what I had to do because I had no control over the music. So when Epitaph heard it, they even dissed me. They were like, your voice sounds like the guy from 311. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Alright, whatever. Obviously, Nabil was super stressed already with writing the album, and if someone rejects the whole album, he's gonna be like, fuck this shit, and so he left. When that was done, basically Epitaph Records wanted to close the books right then and there, and I was like, no, please, give me one more chance, I'll write it with Travis from first to last and a few other dudes. So I rewrote Astral Rejection, the one that actually came out, named it the same thing, reused a lot of old lyrics, and made a new album that sounded a little more like us. That doesn't mean that I don't think what we originally wrote was kinda cool, especially for the time. I go back and listen to it now and again and I'm like, damn, this shit actually isn't that bad. I can't believe we even thought of some of this shit. That's basically what happened. That's the whole story of Astral Rejection. This would ultimately result in the 2019 remaster and full release of the original version of Astral Rejection. Titled the same, but with an OG at the end of it, which, big mistake. They could have called it Astral Rejected, but hey, who am I to say anything? But the final release of this original version of the record was huge. This was the album that we had all wanted all along. And before you ask, no, it's not just a couple songs. The whole record is just killer, and especially when we get to hear the original versions of many of the old songs like ISMFOF. As well as just god-tier tracks that we didn't get at all. It's just very, very good to finally be able to hear this. As a lifelong fan of the band, I can't express just how great it is to finally hear this record. And with the story of why things went the way they did finally filled in, the truth about Nabil's real departure, the actual reason that Astral Rejection 2011 was the way it was, and just in general, the closure that we finally get to see and hear what could have been all that long ago, and get the full picture of just what was supposed to be, well, it just felt like a nice closing of the book in a positive way. It felt like genuine closure for a lot of fans of the band, myself included, onto basically all of the questions and all the weirdness that had happened since then. And what made it even better was the fact that, at this point, ISMFOF was back and here to stay, and in a much better state than it was way back when the original Astral Rejection released. Since all the craziness of 2019 after Astral Rejection OG came out, the band has since gone on to sit in a odd place again to a certain extent, but more so just because we still don't have that forthcoming record or Caterpillar Sex. But on another note, they are consistently putting out new singles, Matt is doing more collabs, and they are still touring pretty regularly. So, honestly, things are in the best place that they probably can be, especially since ISMFOF more or less these days is kind of just a legacy act. That being said, if we do end up getting one, if not both of those records, and the band goes full-time again, just touring constantly, I also wouldn't really be surprised, because it does seem like Matt enjoys what he's doing, and the band he has behind him now are very supportive and also very hungry as well. Now, the most pertinent thing I can really say here is that, especially compared to how everything was 10 years ago, is that nowadays, especially with what Matt has been producing, is that there's much more of a cohesive vision at play here. When those initial demos from 2013 came out, they were very jarring to the audience, and obviously, we already talked about it. They weren't received all that well, and they weren't understood. But now, especially after Astral Rejection OG has been released, and we've gotten more songs like My Uzi that really cement that this is a project that will do those older, more contemporary tracks and the more experimental stuff, people have really opened their minds more and been more accepting of the more experimental material, as well as even, the stuff that comes out now tends to blend a lot more of these elements together. And I think there's no better example of this than Versace Tamagotchi. Look, I implore you to listen to this entire track, because if you were a fan of this band at any point, this song deserves your attention. It's a beautiful marriage of the original material that they did in the past and the modern experimental side that Matt has been producing since 2013. And it's what I ultimately hope the future of the band is going to be if we ever do get one of those records. I guess to tie this all up is just that ISMFOF is an amazing project, from its ethos as two best friends starting a band and making some crazy stuff and becoming pioneers and icons for the time, to the troubled period where, despite everything that was going on and the label issues and the alienation of the fan base, they still fought through and tried to produce the best record they could possible given the circumstances and chug along. And even through hearing loss, deafness, and losing all of his band members, Matt still carried the torch, just for things to finally come together in the end. And the modern reality of the band now, with a lot of the singles and EPs that come out that are still experimental and maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but are just really, again, really fucking good. ISMFOF deserves their flowers. They deserve their respect as OGs that really did what they did better than anybody else and innovated the scene, but they also deserve their flowers in the modern age for still pushing that barrier, still pushing the boundary further and creating amazing and experimental music that no one else ever could. And before we wrap this up, I would just like to say shout out to Sonny Malik, to All the Crowded Rooms, and the Demo Team podcast. The great interviews each of them did with the various members of the band are where a lot of the information for this video came from, and without their hard work and great journalism, projects like this video just wouldn't be possible. Their interviews have been linked in the description. Please give them some attention and some kudos. But with all that being said, there is just one more thing I want to show you before you go. This is my wall of shame. The names of the individuals who saw the garbage I produced and thought, yeah, this guy is in need of some charity. Let me throw some pity bucks his way. And hey, thanks guys. It's your contributions to the financial guilt I have around my neck that keeps me making these videos. And to any of you who haven't already, if you like what you see and you want to support, or maybe you're just narcissistic and want to see your name up here with everyone else's, well, you can do so by throwing me some support on Patreon or Ko-fi. Links are in the description. But with that, subscribe, join the Discord server, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.